Several years ago, I worked with Ecclesia Ministries, and this is a ministry of the Episcopal Cathedral in Boston that works with folks experiencing homelessness. I know I've mentioned them before, but today I want to tell you one of the harder stories that I heard during my time with Ecclesia. Every Monday, our ministry offered a meal at the cathedral in Boston. Now, the city was big enough that if a person had the willingness and ability to travel, they could get at least a meal a day. But there was little time to do other things like applying for assistance, working on housing, spending time with friends, taking care of the other needs that we have as human beings. Imagine having to make that calculation every day. At one of these Monday meals, I sat with a man who had been a few times, but often sat alone, and we started chatting. During the conversation, he said, "You know, when someone first goes out on the streets, they're okay. Going through some rough things, but they're okay. Then a couple of years later, you see them and they're talking to trees. You know what does it? What gets them? It's the loneliness." I don't think I'll ever forget that conversation. The folks I worked with in Boston faced a day-to-day struggle for every part of survival. And this man saw loneliness as one of the most dangerous parts of that life. Mother Teresa called loneliness the most terrible poverty. We human beings need connection with one another. We need to know people see us and care about what we're going through. We need to know people are with us on the journey. Author and researcher Brene Brown says, "Connection is why we are here. We are hardwired to connect with others. It's what gives purpose and meaning to our lives. And without it, there is suffering." The need for connection is what draws many of us to church on Sundays. In fact, one of the primary reasons that people say they belong to a Unitarian Universalist congregation is the community they find there. And every Sunday, a part of our service is devoted exclusively to connecting with one another. We recognize that the joys shared are joys multiplied, and concerns shared are worries lightened. Because in these moments, we are feeling connected to one another. And we need deep connection, and we know we need it. So what gets in the way? Part of the problem is our culture. Brown suggests that we have a culture of comparison, shame, and disengagement. So let's explore that a bit, just for, a lighthearted aside to the rest of the service. How often have you compared yourself to someone else and found yourself wanting because the other person was thinner, a better housekeeper, had more money, spent more time changing the world, or something else? How often do we think, "Oh gosh, I can't take a break or go on vacation because blank is going through so much more than I am"? When we spend our time in comparison to others, we are stealing our own ability to be honest and content with who we are. The second part of our culture that gets in the way of our ability to connect with one another authentically is shame. We shame one another and ourselves in different ways. In politics, how often does one side of the spectrum say to the other, or another side say that the other side is inherently flawed? Our political attacks have gotten to be about the inherent nature of those on the other side, not just a difference of opinions about issues. And we see this in religious communities too. Some people within conservative religions claim that those in more liberal traditions are evil. And let's be honest, while we might not use the same words, some within our liberal religions feel that way about members of conservative religions. I think a piece of why we relate to one another like this in core areas of our common lives together is because we so often direct shame inward to ourselves. Brown calls shame the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. We've all experienced it. A time when we did something or experienced something that felt like an indictment against our own character. Shame tends to give us two messages. One is, you are not good enough. And the second is, who do you think you are? And you can fill in the rest, that you would dare try to become a minister or get a law degree, or dare think you are a good parent, whatever it is. We tend to want to hide when we are feeling ashamed. Whatever we have done, whatever is going on for us, it's hard to imagine we might tell others about it. Doing so can feel like being caught out and about in our underwear. But I've learned over time that if I know I'm starting to feel shame, I need to tell a trusted person in my life what happened before it digs in and grows roots. Shame grows in secrecy. Shame grows when we can't connect with someone we trust and when we can't be vulnerable. Shame grows in fear of judgment from ourselves or others. But shame dies in the face of empathy and authentic connection. In reflecting on my own past experiences with shame, a few different stories come to mind, including one that led to my ability to be with you here this morning. To become a Unitarian Universalist minister, a person has to go through several steps, including years of training and writing deeply about one's experiences and understanding of the world. A candidate undergoes a psychological evaluation that spans the course of 2 days and multiple tests and conversations. And after all of that, with everything you believe you are in one packet of about 100 pages, you go before a panel known as the Ministerial Fellowship Committee. When a candidate sees the Fellowship Committee, they present one 10-minute sermon and are interviewed for about an hour. The committee can ask about anything. After that session, they give candidates a ranking of 1 through 5. 1 and 2 mean a person can go on to become ordained as a minister. A 3 means the committee sees potential, but something's missing. They want the candidate to do some work and return at another time. A 3 comes with specific recommendations. A 4, it is a discouragement to continue forward in ministry. And a 5 means you are not allowed to continue forward. After my seminary education and internship and being assured by everyone around me that I was ready to go into ministry, I went before the MFC. I preached a sermon on wonder that I had spent months preparing. I answered questions about my understanding of my own history and our religious history and the role of religious formation. And I faced grilling about the psychologist's belief, written in his report, that my weight was a sign of poor mental health. And in the end, I received a 3 from the fellowship committee. I was devastated and ashamed. I would have to tell everyone in my internship congregation, in my social world, in my family, that I wasn't good enough to be a minister. Notice how easy it is to go from, we see some work for you to do, to, I'm not enough. I had traveled alone from California to Boston, Massachusetts to see the committee. It was pre-COVID, so all of those meetings were in person in Boston. But it was to my great benefit that I still had friends who lived in the area. I stayed with one of them that night, and she let me sob and claim I would never be a minister and I had wasted years of my life, and don't get me started on the student loans. And an aspiring minister herself, I imagine she must have had her own concerns. But she just listened. And she responded with deep empathy and made sure I had water to drink and something to eat when I needed it. And because I had that connection, that place to be vulnerable, the shame didn't grow. And by the time I left, I had a plan. I did nearly tell everyone in my life all at once by just posting it on Facebook, just get it over with. But I had also decided how I would address the recommendations that the committee gave me, and that next year I would be back. And it was because of that experience that I had the opportunity to do a second internship in Canada, my first time ever leaving the country, let alone living in a different country. That deeply broadened my understanding of our UU tradition and my own identity. And when I returned, when I saw them again 1 year later, I received a 1 from the committee, the highest possible score. I couldn't have done it if the shame had stayed inside me, feeding off silence and judgment. I needed empathy and connection so I could move it to something else. My friends, shame is one of the most powerful, painful experiences we have as human beings. And we all have physical symptoms of shame. You might know what they are. For me, it's tightness, heaviness, that sinking feeling in your gut. Sometimes it's nausea. Pay attention to what those sensations might be for you. It will help you identify when your response to what is happening is to feel shame. And is it any wonder that one of the basic responses that we have to shame is to try to numb the feelings? That could be through substances or avoidance behaviors. The problem is that when we numb the hard feelings in our life, we also numb our ability to experience joy, happiness, and our own sense of worth. In our culture of shame and comparison, disengagement is another problem we face. We disengage to protect ourselves from feeling vulnerable, from risking shame. We disengage when the message we are getting from others, including our political leaders, is that we can't trust. Why should I care if everybody else is going to do what they want anyway? So what is the antidote to all of this? Deep authenticity and vulnerability. It means the removal of the masks we hide behind to fit in, to try and gain others' approval. Vulnerability is risky. And that feeling of vulnerability sucks. If we're honest and open with others, what if they reject us for the person we are? It is so very much easier to be rejected for the person you're pretending to be. Then it's not really you. Vulnerability requires courage. Brene Brown says, the root word of courage is cor, C-O-R, the Latin word for heart. In one of its earliest forms, the word courage had a very different definition than it does today. Courage originally meant to speak one's mind by telling all one's heart. Over time, this definition has changed, and today, courage is more synonymous with being heroic. Now, heroics are important, and we need heroes, but I think we've lost touch with the idea that speaking honestly and openly about who we are, about what we're feeling, and about our experiences, good and bad, is the definition of courage. Heroics is often about putting our life on the line. Ordinary courage is about putting our vulnerability on the line. In today's world, that's pretty extraordinary. Being vulnerable and authentic about our truth, our lives, our flaws, our thoughts and feelings gives us the ability to be deeply connected to another person and seen for who we are. Rebecca, from our reading today, if she hadn't taken the risk of being vulnerable and coming out of her shame to connect, she wouldn't have been there for her friend in that time of deep need. When we no longer hide behind what we expect everyone else wants us to be, then we can be free. Theodore Roosevelt once said, "It's not the critic who counts. It belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, the one who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly." My beloved spiritual companions, may we have the courage of the bear from our story today, who, when certain there was something off, sought out a friend for help. May we be like the friend who joined the bear in that vulnerability. And may we strive to remember we have inherent worth and dignity, even when it doesn't feel like it. May we have the courage to become real. Blessed be.